Educators Lead, episode 128.
Nobody hired a cynic. If there are cynics in education today, it is because we cultivated them. We didn't hire them. Your job, any of your listeners' jobs who are school leaders, is this. Let your teachers be the people they described in their interview. That's who we hire. That's who we need in front of kids.
Welcome to Educators Lead, where we interview leaders in education to offer inspiration and practical advice to help launch educators into the next level of leadership. I'm your host, Jay Willis, and I want to thank you for subscribing to our show.
This is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Educators Lead. Let's join my friend Jay Willis and get ready to take your leadership to the next level.
Hello, EduLeaders. Jay Willis here, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Tom Hierck. Tom, are you ready?
I am ready, Jay, to have an awesome morning, an awesome day, and ready to listen all and help out with all the EduLeaders. Hope everybody's tuned in and ready to rock and roll.
Fantastic. Tom Hierck has been an educator since 1983 in a career that has spanned all grade levels and roles in public education. His experiences as a teacher, administrator, district leader, Department of Education project leader, and executive director have provided a unique context for his education philosophy. Tom is a compelling presenter and author, infusing his message of hope with strategies culled from the real world. His belief that every student is a success story waiting to be told has led him to work with teachers and administrators to create positive school cultures and build effective relationships that facilitate learning for all students. So that's just a brief introduction, Tom, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
You know, it's often interesting, Jay, when I hear that brief introduction. On some levels, it sounds like I can't hold a job for very long. So it's that fine line between gathering lots and lots of experiences and getting out of places quickly. So,
yeah.
No, it's I can't believe, Jay, that the 34 years have gone by. It seems like in a blink of an eye. And honest to goodness, when I started out, I wanted to be the world's best high school biology and chemistry teacher. That was my ambition. But the one thing I have always tried to maintain is a strong desire to learn. So I can tell your audience clearly that I had never an intention of one day being a consultant and an author and traveling the amount of travel that I do, but I've always wanted to learn more. And so when opportunities presented themselves, I had great colleagues right from the outset. I had great mentors, people leading me throughout who were always willing to give of their time. And it's a reminder to me that I think all of us in this profession owe that to our colleagues, to give them that gift of time so that they can grow in their own.
Yeah, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so before we jump into, I guess, your personal journey, what would be something interesting about yourself that maybe most people wouldn't know?
I like to run. I try to take my shoes with me everywhere I go. It's one of the best ways to release the stress of travel and some of the work we do. It also gives me a great way to look into the communities that I'm then visiting. I run marathons. I've completed 48 marathons, and I don't have any intention of slowing down just yet.
Wow. So what's the most notable marathon that you've had a chance to run?
Well, I got to do the 100th anniversary of Boston, so that was really neat. I had to qualify for that. I've done marathons in a variety of different states, lots in the Pacific Northwest region, close to home. But I've had a chance to travel. New York City is a great one. Running a marathon in Maui in the early hours of the morning is always spectacular. So, it's been very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, well, that's neat. Yeah, we had a chance to visit Maui on our honeymoon, actually, so it's been a few years, but it's a beautiful place. I can imagine that would be one of your most memorable places to run, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess for people who may not be familiar with your story, if you don't mind, maybe start from the beginning and talk about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I started off, as I said, as a high school math and science teacher. Really was always interested in pursuing. Initially, I hadn't thought of being a teacher. I'd actually planned to pursue a career in medicine. I'd done a lot of research in genetics. That was my field. I spent a couple of years working at a university laboratory. But, there was something that was just missing. I had always enjoyed being around others, being around youth, coaching, participating in activities. So, before I entered into the world of medicine, I made the crossover into education. And gosh, that was the best decision I think I would have made at that moment. And so I started teaching in a small community in the central part of British Columbia. I spent 3 years there before returning to my wife's hometown, where I spent the bulk of my career. Very quickly, from education as a classroom teacher into education as a school-based leader, that happened early in my career. I'd only taught for about 8 years before I moved into an assistant principalship at a middle school. And if any of your audience is middle school, they know middle school is a high-energy place. I say to folks that middle school instruction is kind of like the education equivalent of dog years. For every year you're in a middle school, I think it counts for about 3 years in your career. So I spent 11 years there as the assistant principal and ultimately the principal. And much of the foundation of, the first book I wrote, Pyramid of Behavior Interventions, came from that experience. 11 years there, I wanted to know what was happening with some of the kids we were losing to distance learning. So I had a stint in our distance learning environment. I also got to do the international students. Again, just trying to find out more and more information along the way. I got to lead an organization of principals and vice principals for a couple of years. I got to work in our Department of Education for a couple of years. Again, always with the pursuit of trying to find out more, trying to find out how, departments of education function. And you get some great insights there. I think there are well-meaning, well-intentioned people working there. But what became clear to me, and as a reminder, the further you are removed from a school, the more every school starts to look the same. Right. And so I don't blame folks in our departments of education for some of the things that maybe we at the ground level think, how did they ever come up with that? The more removed you are from a school, the more every school looks the same. So I did that for a couple of years. Then I moved into a board level position as an assistant superintendent. And that was great. And I did that for 5 years. But something was still missing. I found that where my passion for being with colleagues and being in the classroom with kids, I wasn't getting that opportunity as much anymore. And 75-80% of my time was spent in meetings. And so I made the decision to leave that career behind. People questioned my sanity as I walked away from, your pension and a little bit more contributing service to your retirement package. But it was time to do something different. And so for the last 5 years, I've been traveling the countryside. I've been in every province and territory in my own country of Canada. I think I've been up to 47 states, and I've had a chance to be now on 6 continents. In fact, later today, I'm going to be heading out to Australia to continue to work with colleagues there. And so, as I said, all of a sudden it adds up to 34 years, and I don't know where that time has gone. But boy, there's been some significant people that have added value to my learning, to my career along the way.
Wow, what a rich experience. Man, I feel like there's so much that I could dig into, but since we're limited on time, let's, I guess, at what point along the journey did you kind of make the decision that you wanted to move into school leadership? Was there kind of a specific story behind that?
Yeah, from the outset, my first year teaching, we had an amazing principal in the school, John Dressler. And John had any time you wanted to guide, right? So there I was as a first year teacher, not really even knowing much about how to be an effective teacher. John would come by my classroom. He would stay after school with me. He'd just start talking about all kinds of different educational topics. He'd share some of his career, never with, this is the better way to do it. But, here's some things that worked for me. And here's some things that didn't work. We had a staff of about 41 or 42 people there, a teaching staff. And at last count, 34 of them had gone into school or district-based leadership. And I think it can all be tied right back to John and the passion he had for the profession, for leading, for guiding others, for sharing his experiences. And so, that was year one of getting the thought process around some of that. But I still wasn't really convinced. I'd always, as I said, thought I would be a teacher and a teacher in the classroom and provide my leadership in that domain. When we switched to my wife's hometown of Nelson, British Columbia, the middle school there was in the throes of transition, significant change. I got approached to ask if I'd ever consider adding my skill set to the work that was going on there. And, I sort of wondered why I was being asked. But the person who was asking was someone, again, that I trusted, that I had great confidence in. And I thought, well, if they're asking, they must think that there's something I can do. And so I threw my application in, fully intending to be told, thank you. We really like what you're doing. And in another decade of teaching, maybe come back when you've got a bit more experience. The fact that I got the job came as a bit of a surprise, but allowed me to build on and to start making some connections. So I think those were the first insights, going back to John Dressler and then another colleague in the second community that I was working in who came to me and said, we think you can add something to.
Yeah. So what was it about you that you think caused them to kind of, and not for like shameless self-promotion, but really to be helpful for those, people who aspire to become school leaders? What was it, do you think, that set you apart? Because you went in fully expecting to not get the position, and then you ended up obviously getting the position. So what was it you think they saw in you?
Yeah, I think that if I have a strength, I think it's the ability to bring people together and to try and fairly quickly consolidate what it is we're all about. I think it's the talent I have today when I work with audiences. I believe I can get a sense of the room in the first half hour and reshape how I present and how I draw people in. So I think that capacity and the school at that point really was floundering. They had hit rock bottom and started digging. It was really heading south in a hurry. And so I think they needed someone who could come in and bring that to bear. And so I think that's the strength that I bring to it, is the ability to have people feel their voices have been heard as we work to create. And in fact, the last book, prior to the most recent one, the book Starting a Movement, that I was fortunate to write with Ken Williams, we talk a whole lot about being purpose-driven and about establishing collective commitment. And as we were preparing that book, I thought, wow, this is really what I've been all about in my career, is trying to draw people together. And interestingly enough, it actually extended beyond. The same community that I was living in had unsuccessfully had 2 referendums to get a new recreation complex and a place for youth. And they knew they had one more kick at the can. And so a referendum that had failed really well, they said, hey, would you lead the referendum for the 3rd time? Same recognition, I think, of the ability to draw people together. And I spent a lot of time traversing the community, trying to get all the different interests from youth all the way up to the seniors, and took great pride when the referendum passed with over a 2/3 majority. So,
wow.
Those sorts of things I think are what I bring to the table, the ability to. My work in the Department of Education was based on that same capacity to draw people together.
So what do you think the key to that is? Obviously, you've been successful in accomplishing that. I know maybe some of it comes naturally, but what do you think has helped you to be able to bring people together well?
I think active listening is a very critical component. I think sometimes we listen with the intention of speaking, not with the intention of hearing. Growing up early on, I heard this, and maybe some of your audience has heard the same old adage: 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionally.
Right.
And so I'm often reminded that, to be an active and intentional listener is a real skill, and we don't practice that enough. I think it's also important to give people voice and understand that if you've spent a lot of time thinking about an idea before you present it to others, that you've got a leg up on them. And that in that audience, there will be some people who don't process to the same degree that you have, who haven't had the same think time, but may still have some valuable opinions. And so how we elicit that, how we solicit the variety of viewpoints as we work towards creating that collective commitment is the hard work. And, I spent a lot of time trying to clarify the difference between easy and hard in our profession. if I ask people to think about the most ineffective practices in education today, very quickly we start consolidating, and I think they could all be filed under a one-word heading, and that one word would be easy. Right? It's easier to work alone than it is to collaborate, because collaborate means I may have to let go of some stuff. The hard work of establishing a collective commitment means that you will get it right, you'll be purpose-driven, and everything flows from that. So although it may take a little bit more time up front, the benefits that you reap down the line are significant.
Well, so, in your journey, I guess, as once you made the decision to move into school leadership, what were maybe some of the struggles that you encountered along the way? Maybe in the journey, but then maybe even in that first role as a school leader?
There are some things that come when you make that transition that and part of it may have been my youth. I was still a little wet behind the ears, but I didn't appreciate and didn't embrace right away some of the formal trappings of the job. And you have to come to realize that as a member of a teaching faculty, if you're one of 50, and there's the exchanges that occur, the little good-natured kidding that happens amongst colleagues, the teasing if your team lost the night before, we can come in and take a poke at you. Some of that is a little harder to accomplish when you cross over into school-based administration. And so making that transition early on, it was like, I was very sensitive to whether or not I had the same friends as I had before I became, a school-based administrator. And it was recognizing that there was some authority now that came with the job, and the good-natured ribbing that I could do as a colleague maybe wasn't as easily accomplished as someone who might be perceived as being their boss. So there's a little bit of transition there early on. There was the recognition early on that, there's a variety of viewpoints on any faculty. And by and large, none of them are wrong. They just need to be shaped towards our collective commitment. Listen, nobody gets into education to be marginal or ineffective, right? This is too challenging a role. Nobody gets in it because it's easy. This is a passion. It's a passion that people put their hands up. Educators have such a skill set that really and truly, if it weren't for their passion, their desire to make a difference in the lives of kids, there's a number of other jobs educators could be doing. And so it had to be that recognition that if people had arrived at a different place, then perhaps it was on the leadership to get them back to the people they once were.
Yeah. So I guess, as you were talking about your journey, and just as you had mentioned that as you move up, that it gets more difficult to keep that perspective of what goes on in the classroom.
Yeah.
So, but I guess for listeners who maybe find themselves in a position, maybe they're a school leader, or maybe they've moved on to becoming a district leader, maybe even some superintendents who are listening. What suggestions would you have for those people to stay connected so that they don't lose sight of what it is like for those teachers in the classroom?
Yeah, presence more than anything else dictates importance, right? When I became a district leader, one of the first things I did when I talked with the principals was I suggested this very strongly. I should not be able to phone the school and get you to respond right away. In other words, I shouldn't be able to phone your office and have the front office folks say, yes, he's right here, or yes, she's right here. Right? It ought to always have been that, because in my mind, the hours of school are people time. And so you're best served by getting out into classrooms, by interacting with others, by letting them see that side of you. The hours after school are paper time. And I recognize, listen, I know there's a volume of work that needs to be done, and I'm certainly not suggesting for a moment, that school and district-based leaders have nothing but free time. But I think your presence dictates something. I think when your teachers see you regularly in the classrooms, just as part of the learning environment, as opposed to that infrequent occurrence where the world must stop when the principal enters the room, I think kids need to know who the leader of the school is and see that person and interact with that person. The number one bit of advice I give principals is this: learn every kid's name and something about them. Humanize the process. And so I think more than anything else, that starts to drive a lot of the decision making, a lot of the establishing of that collective commitment. Teachers need to know, listen, let's agree on this. No principal can be as fluent as a classroom teacher on every aspect of that classroom, from the curriculum end of things through the learning outcomes, through the materials, etc. But the more time you spend in there, the more value-added questions you can ask. And it doesn't seem like you're just at the surface level asking about the latest fad in education.
Yeah, that sounds great. How do you do that, though? I mean, because you have so many demands on your time, so many, you're trying to juggle so many different things, and obviously you're responsible for a lot. So how do you do that?
And the number one question I get asked when I go out and work with folks is this: where am I going to find the time? And my answer is always the same: you won't. Right? Because if you could find the time, you would have already. Nobody is getting to the end of the day with a half hour to kill saying, gosh, what should I do with this block of time, right? Nobody's looking for something to occupy their time. But curiously enough, we always seem to make time for what we value the most, right? And the more we make time, the more we spend time on things, the clearer it becomes what our priorities are. And I give this example. I've often had teachers say, listen, Tom, I really believe what you're saying about being positive and acknowledging kids, but I just don't have the time. My class is packed. I've got an agenda. I've got all this stuff to get through. And I will believe them. I don't ever in a moment doubt when a teacher is being sincere and sharing with me how busy their day is. And so then I would expect, that if they don't have time to acknowledge Jay and his great work, that if Jay has an off day, they equally don't have time. But here's the rub. If Jay is off task today in class, I feel compelled as the teacher to say, Jay, get back on track. Now, many, many times, Jay simply responds appropriately and gets back on track. But every once in a while, if Jay senses a disturbance in the force, he knows he can push buttons. And so Jay says, no. And I turn around as the teacher and I say, Jay, I've asked you to get back on with your work. And Jay, my student, looks at me and says, make me. Well, now the game's on, isn't it? Buttons have been pushed. Now we're going to get into an escalation. We're going to have a display that will result in me being in the power position, ultimately winning the dispute and removing Jay from class. But now I don't trust him to walk to the office by himself. So I, in fact, walk him down to the office. And so my very humble question is this: where did you find the time for all of that? Was it in your day planner? Did you have it as part of your agenda? Right? And of course we haven't. Amazingly, though, we have sent a critically important lesson to our kids. We don't have time to acknowledge all the good stuff you're doing, but by golly, we will find time when you are off task. Now, in the myriad of things we must do, in the myriad of expectations on our school leaders, the paperwork, the reporting, all of those sorts of things, there has to be sacred time built in every day to get out of the office into classrooms, right? That's that conscious decision made, because we do we do change things for whatever we value. So if you value being in the classroom, connecting with your teachers, connecting with your students, then that becomes part of the day. I've worked in schools where the principal is out first thing in the morning, greeting the buses as they come in, greeting the parents as they drop off their children. I know those principals don't have any more time in the morning than any other principal. But they have just said, you know what, if I'm there first thing in the morning and I greet every kid, it just changes the tone. It may be the only time I get to see some parents who are reluctant to come into the school, but they drop their kid off. And if I poke my head in the door and say, hey, good morning, Mr. Jones. Good morning, Mrs. Smith. Have a great day. Thanks for dropping your kids off. Doesn't that add value? Because here's what is become really apparent to me over 34 years. You have a choice. And it's like the old commercial. You might remember, some of your audience might remember the notion of you can pay me now or you can pay me later. We can invest the time in our kids and in our schools up front, or we can have to invest it in more time, smaller chunks, but many more of them later on. Time is finite. You only get so much of it. The best things you have ever done in your career, Jay, the best thing any of your listeners have ever done in their career, the first time they did it, it took time. Subsequent to that, they gained the time back. We have a choice to make: upfront time, or what I refer to in the last book, 7 Keys book, as chase time. Chase time is that time that is born out of trying to remediate after the fact because we didn't do our good work up front. Chase time is now trying to resolve a conflict because we didn't have clarity around what our expectations were. Chase time is what happens when we don't own the problem, but we try to hive it off to each individual colleague. And chase time is the single biggest waste of time in schools today. Hardly ever produces a positive outcome.
You know, just as you're speaking, I feel like a message that I keep hearing over and over, and just a reality that I feel like I'm beginning to internalize. Obviously, I don't do a great job every day all the time. Like none of us do any good thing, you know, but just being intentional. I mean, just how you just can't drift through. You have to be intentional. And just the thing that you're talking about, just if something's important to you, you're going to make the time for it. But you do have to be intentional, because with everybody listening to this podcast, you're probably busy, and it's not just going to happen accidentally. You have to be proactive.
Well, you know, and I often say to people, listen, think about it as your own family. Jay, you mentioned you have 3 kids, right? You and your wife, I bet you have busy days.
Oh, yeah.
I bet you don't find time at the end of the day that you need to occupy. And yet your children are so very important to you that you make the time. You've got a daughter that's a little under the weather. So what do? You make the time.
Yeah.
What do? You sacrifice your own time. You probably don't get as good a sleep yourself, and yet you go to work the next day. There are lives hanging in the balance based on the decisions we as adults in the education system make. Now, I can spend all of my time wanting to name, shame, and blame, or I can spend all of my time being very proactive and saying, look, it is on us. You know, the realities that some of our kids come to school with, the variables that they present, might dictate they could have a worse experience than we're prepared to let them have. Or we can be intentional. It means we've got to sit down and say, what is it that we're all about? What is our driving purpose? What is our why? And then adhering to that. Are we going to falter? Of course. We're human. We all make mistakes. We all sometimes, get a little too emotional. I don't want us to be emotional about our work. I want us to be passionate about our work. Emotion is driven by feelings. Passion is driven by beliefs. But again, got to be intentional. Got to be able to look together as a group of colleagues and say, whatever we see, we as a group are far too powerful to let this overwhelm us.
Yeah, I love it. There's so many thoughts bouncing around in my head. You know, like just last night, I'm actually packing to take a quick overnight trip, and we just gotten the kids to bed, and my wife, I'm looking at this huge list of things I need to do before I leave, and my wife sits down and obviously just has a lot on her mind, and so. And the first thought was, especially as a guy, like we have this to-do list and we're very focused. It's very, it's just very linear in my thinking where it's like, okay, I don't have closure on this task that I've started. But I kind of checked that and I said, you know what, there's nothing more important right now that I could be doing than connecting with my wife.
Yeah.
And so, but it was an intentional choice. It wasn't, because I could have allowed myself to just get drift the typical thing that I sometimes would do maybe before I had learned some hard lessons. I would allow myself to just stay down the path that I was on. Okay, well, yeah, we can talk after I'm finished with this task, but this is just super, super important. And I mean, there's just, especially when you're dealing with, as an educator, lives of children. I mean, you have the responsibility to help set the trajectory of their life. And I mean, that's just such a, not that you should necessarily freak out about that or worry too much, as far as that goes, but like you should definitely take it seriously and try to come at it with that perspective where, I am helping to shape this person. So I kind of need to check my own issues at the door and my own to-do list and all this stuff. And I just need to be there for this person.
No. And when we get to that point, and when we get to, as a group, establishing that as our purpose, all of a sudden it becomes the right work to do. When we get caught in a hard spot, and we will, because we don't have control over every factor in a kid's life. But when we get to a challenging spot as a group, as a faculty, we know we have purpose clarity when during the struggle, we turn to each other. We know we don't have purpose clarity when during the struggle, we turn against each other. And that's why the work's so critical. That's why it's got to be that we have these deep, meaningful, intentional conversations about what we believe in, what we stand for, our purpose, our why. In the absence of that clarity, what I've seen far too often is people rush to what we talk about as the how phase. They implement tools. And if you don't have a purpose, grabbing a tool is probably the worst strategy you can engage in, right? It's the old analogy when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
You ever seen people use a hammer to drive a screw? Right? They've used a hammer to smack staples right? It becomes ineffective. If we don't have purpose clarity and we rush to use tools, they in fact become weapons instead of tools. If you don't believe, for example, that every kid can and will learn, that every kid can and will achieve success, then it's pointless to have a conversation around assessment practice. Because all you'll do is you'll use assessment ineffectively to validate what you already believed about kids, that some kids can't learn. See, now I have evidence. They failed again. If you don't believe in all kids, there's no point to having a discussion around response, intervention, and instruction, because you'll just want to use that tool as a weapon to label kids to get them out of your class and into special education. If you don't believe in all kids, there's no point to having collaboration and having a professional learning community model at your school, because you know you're the smartest person in the group anyways, and what do the rest of them know? And your collaborative time will just always be thought of as a loss of instructional time that is really not doing anything. It'll become a weapon.
Well, so I know that one of the things that's important, I guess, for a teacher to be able to be fully present and available for their students is they kind of need to feel somewhat centered, at least at some level. Like we were talking earlier about, you need to be able to kind of check yourself at the door to some, but there's sometimes when, you have a lot going on in your life, or just there's crazy things going on where maybe that's a little bit more difficult. What would you recommend a school leader does to help create an environment where the teachers are fulfilled and maybe centered so they can be there to provide the support that the students need?
I think one of the things that we don't do enough of today in schools is to celebrate. I think generally speaking, as educators, we're a very humble lot. We don't get up in the bell towers and scream our lungs out and brag about the great work we do. And so we've got to, again, be intentional about our celebration. Listen, if you've asked your colleagues to get together in service of kids, we ought to be acknowledging every time we have a breakthrough, every time we get a toehold in service of something different. And I think we've lost the art of celebrating in schools and acknowledging the good work. Celebration is a reminder of what we've done, the hard work, the results we've had, and the fact that we kind of like hanging out with each other. We are a team for a reason, and it deepens those team connections. So I think we've got to do that. I think we've got to peel back to the original layer. And I've worked with some schools where I don't want the nodding heads. I don't want the universal agreement. Ultimately, we want to get everybody on the same page. But if I come to the first meeting and everybody agrees with everything I've said, I know this for certain. People are exiting the room disagreeing. They've just realized it's better to remain quiet than to surface the issue. Again, in the easy, hard debate, the easy thing to do is to go in there and hold people accountable, make them compliant. I am the school leader. The authority vested in me means I can make you do stuff, right? And you know what happens in a compliance model? We just get nodding heads. Mm-hmm. They know that you can't get around to every classroom. And in fact, they start to work out a signal of, if you're going to go, everybody knows Jay comes around Monday morning. He starts on the third floor. The third floor teachers start to communicate with each other. Hey, Jay's at 302. He's coming to 300. 300, come in. He's on your way. By the time you arrive to room 300, the kids are all sitting up straight. They've got big smiles on their face. And you walk in the room and they say, "Good morning, Mr. Willis." Right? It's artificial. In fact, I had one teacher explain to me an extreme routine that a colleague had implemented. The colleague had instructed their class that whenever the principal came in, they would ask a question. And they needed every kid to raise their hand. And if they knew the right answer, they should raise their right hand. And if they didn't, they should raise their left hand. Said it worked like a charm. Convinced the principal every time when they walked in, my class was really responsive.
Wow.
Is that really what we want, a compliance model? Collective commitment takes time. It means we've got to surface up the tough issues. It means that as leaders, we've got to listen to the contrary points of view and at least hear them out. Listen, nobody hired a cynic. If there are cynics in education today, it is because we cultivated them. We didn't hire them. Your job, any of your listeners' jobs who are school leaders, is this. Let your teachers be the people they described in their interview. Right? I have yet to have a teacher go into an interview and, given a few minutes to freewheel about themselves, come in as anything other than the kinds of people we want in front of kids. I've never had a teacher say, "You know what? I'm kind of average. I mean, if you get 3 good days out of me in a week, it'll be a miracle. I'm just not that talented. I've had good moments, but never consistently, so I just don't want to set the bar too high." Right? Do you remember what you said about yourself in your interview? When you had a chance to freewheel, right? Yeah. That's who we hire. That's who we need in front of kids. Our jobs as leaders is to let our educators be the people they described in the interview. Keep that passion going. Right? That's what makes a difference. So we got to celebrate. We got to acknowledge. Listen, when we are trying, and we have some kids, we got little Tommy last year, spent 17 days in the office. Highest achieving grade he got or percentage he got was barely 60. We don't mean that kid to be part of our all, do we? Well, yes, we do. And so now we should surface those names. And we should talk through what it means when we say we believe all kids can achieve at high levels. Because if we don't exercise that kind of clarity, then what we've done is the same sort of thing. We have a nudge, nudge, wink, wink agreement that we mean most kids, not all kids. And I think we're past that time in education where we can have anything but every child successful. I don't know where the ones go anymore, Jay, that don't get high school graduation plus. We talked a little bit about the changes in education during my career. When I went to school, it was during a time where clearly school wasn't for everybody, right? And if school wasn't your thing, it was okay. You could find your way. You could find a working wage job. If you had a school that had a graduation rate of 70%, you were almost a model school. Those days are gone. I don't see the pathway anymore for a kid who does not have high school graduation plus. The plus defined by their interest, their passion. So that compels us as a group of adults to get together and talk about every kid that we currently have and how we establish the kinds of environments that will allow learning for all.
So speaking of that, I know that in your work as a teacher and then as a school administrator, I'm sure you just have some wonderful stories to share of the impact that you've been able to witness and to be a part of. But what's been one of your most meaningful stories, I guess, of maybe improvement or the light bulb coming on, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I love the light bulb moments because I'm sure every one of your listeners can think about a kid they've met today who, in the moment, you just didn't see it. We had a similar sort of event. My father-in-law passed away, and he was always a significant part of our Christmas celebrations. And so we knew that Christmas that year would be different. He was singularly responsible for my kids, I believe, holding on to the belief of Santa Claus almost longer than any other kid in the neighborhood because he'd do everything, right? And so when he passed away, we knew Christmas that year would be different. We decided we had to break from our typical family traditions, and we went to as extreme a place as we possibly could. Growing up in having white Christmases every year, we went to Maui for Christmas that year, right? So about as extreme as you could go. Took some time to heal as a family. We had gone out to the neighboring community because the community we lived in, flights sometimes got canceled. So we wanted to play it safe, made sure our flights got out. On our trip home, as we come through Vancouver to then get ready to board the last leg of our flight, as fate would have it, our flight gets canceled. And it's just like, wait, what's going on? And there's an airline in Canada called WestJet. And WestJet is one of those airlines that really does everything to elevate and get everybody feeling really positive and energetic. And so they had us quite excited about this free bus ride we were going to get. Right? And a juice box. I mean, that was just over the top, right? And so as we are boarding the bus, the person who's been coordinating all of this work taps me on the shoulder. He says, "Excuse me, Mr. Hierck, I'd like to talk to you." I think, okay, I'm the lucky passenger. I'm going to get an additional juice box or something, or right? This is my lucky day. Next words out of his mouth, every educator's worst nightmare. "Remember me," he says. Now, you know what you do when you encounter a former student and it's a remember me moment. You try to go through that catalog of all the students you've ever had. He senses my discomfort at trying to remember. He says, "It's Todd." Todd! I pretend to know him, but I don't really yet because it's still not coming clear. As he talks a little bit more, I'm now starting to get the fuzzy memories coming back. Todd is a kid I taught my first year when I taught science. I taught Todd high school science. He says, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." I thought, this is great. He's going to give me a compliment. I should gather my wife and children around for the moment. He says, "Can we talk privately?" All right. Well, off we go. He says, "Remember when you used to open up the gym on Friday nights for floor hockey?" Floor hockey is a big deal in Canada. So Friday night floor hockey. I said, "Yeah, I remember." And here's why I open up the gym, Jay, just between you, me, and the audience. And we have to keep this a secret amongst ourselves. We had a 2-year-old and a newborn at home. I just needed a break.
I can relate.
Yeah, right? So that's why I opened up the gym on Friday nights for floor hockey. He said, "You may not have known this. A number of us would go drinking on Friday nights." He said, "Well, my buddies came by to pick me up to go drink, and I told them, no, I promised Mr. Hierck I'd go play floor hockey." Now, I taught Todd. I taught him high school science. I thought for sure he was going to say to me, "Listen, I was struggling in life, but when you taught me how to balance chemical equations, the heavens opened up, the light shone down on me, and life immediately accelerated." Friday night floor hockey. Here's a kid who needed something to be normalized in his life. He is now in a major airline as a manager, and he attributes it to Friday night floor hockey. Imagine the moments we get day by day to interact with kids. Imagine the power of building those connections. Listen, I would expect that anyone in your audience who is a regular classroom teacher goes to school every day with the intention of kids learning. They design fabulous lessons to hook kids. And it's in addition to that some of our breakthrough moments occur. Right? There are a myriad of stories like that That's the beauty of our profession. It's this awesome responsibility that comes with being an educator, right? But there's also that awesome authority and power that comes with being an educator. There are lives hanging in the balance based on the decisions we make day by day, minute by minute. There are kids looking to us as the only functional adults they get to hang out with day by day, minute by minute. If it's not going to be us, then who will it be? And if it's not going to be now, then when will it be? Because I don't know of a construct in the adult world that even remotely replicates what we have in school. So we got to get to them. Because society, after they reach the age of majority, isn't going to.
Yeah, it reminds me of just my own school journey, and the most memorable teachers that I had growing up, or most memorable experiences that I really feel like changed the trajectory that I was on, are, it was them going above and beyond just what they were supposed to do with teaching, grading papers, and things like that. But it was when they looked, what it felt like was deep inside my soul, and saw me, saw the person that I was behind all the extra stuff, and spoke to that person and saw the value in that person, and consequently brought that out of me.
Yeah, you got it. And, and I'm sure it's an exercise that any of your listeners could do. If we ask people to recall, and I've done this a number of times, nobody ever recalls a pedagogical moment, right? Nobody ever says, wow, you know what? The worksheets I got from my teacher were outstanding. I mean, I went home every day inspired. I thought to myself, where do they find these graphics? Right? Nobody ever remembers, that you had exactly a 73-second introduction as part of your 17-part lesson plan. But they remember all those other moments where you drew them out, right?
Wow, such a rich conversation. But before we leave, I'm going to jump into some rapid fire questions here in a minute. But before I jump into that, I want to just talk briefly about your book, The 7 Keys to a Positive Learning Environment in Your Classroom. So I guess in that, can you kind of tell us a little bit about what brought that book about, and then maybe give us a sneak peek into what it's all about?
Yeah, so the last book, 7 Keys to a Positive Learning Environment, was an interesting one in the sense it was my first solo book. As much as I've been talking with you today, I really do value the interactions with colleagues, and all the writing I had done up until then, I really did want to bounce off other people. But I was given a challenge to write a book that would be akin to Harry Wong's First Days of School book, but from trying to create a positive learning environment that focused on. And so I tried to cull together everything from my 34 years of experience to write a book that I believe every teacher ought to have on their desk. As that book, when things start to slide a little bit, just as a reminder. I've said to people this, the subtitle of that book could be "This is Nothing New," because what I've done is I've tried to just gather the best notions of why we do what we do around assessment, around creating a positive learning environment, around social emotional learning, around investing in kids, around that culture piece, around that leadership piece. So, that was my intention. And certainly, I've been fortunate to have a number of colleagues review that book and come to that very similar conclusion, that it is a book every teacher ought to have on their desk. When you hear some of the folks sharing that out, makes me feel like I hit it right. And so now I work with teachers on trying to do that. And it's not a simple process. It is about being intentional, about creating that learning environment. And it is about having a belief in every kid. That was the impetus largely for that one.
Well, would you mind just kind of highlighting what each of the 7 keys are real quick?
Sure. Yeah. So we talk about, the first is around classroom expectations. And I go through quite a process to explain the difference between expectations and rules. And I remind folks of the old adage about rules are made to be broken, right? Rules are temporary. They're often reactions to what we've seen as misbehavior. Expectations are lifelong. They're built on this notion that it's not only important for you to be respectful in grade 2, grade 7, grade 12, it's important for you to be respectful in life. Again, I go back to the parent examples. We have a choice. We can scare our kids when they misbehave, or we can teach them. Telling your child not to throw your toothbrush in the toilet bowl by grounding them and sending them to their room without ever an explanation as to why it's not healthy to throw your toothbrush in the toilet bowl means that the only time they'll throw the toothbrush in the toilet bowl is when you're not home. And then they'll pull it out again and they'll dry it off and you'll use it for the next month, right? So chapter 1 is about classroom expectations, the first key. The second key is about targeted instruction. Once we agree on what we're going to be, who should teach it? And the short answer is, of course, everyone. We are all on in service of kids. Yes, every one of your listeners has an assignment, something defined by where they spend the bulk of their time. But we have a responsibility to every kid. The next key is positive reinforcement. The research is clear and unequivocal. For every negative we experience in our lives, it takes 4 positives to bring us back to balance. 4 to 1's really hard to get to. It goes back to that example of, I don't have time to be positive. Well, then don't waste time being negative. I summarize it this way. Being positive doesn't guarantee results, but being negative sure does. So we try to focus on the positive reinforcement. The next key is about data-driven decisions. We've got to return data to its most positive intention in education. It's a way of gathering evidence. Did I get the instructional design right? Are my kids learning? Data, unfortunately, has become a tool to rank and sort, so it's now become a weapon. That's not the intention. We ought to make decisions in every school, in every office, in every district office based on strong evidence. We have lots of data. In fact, my colleague Douglas Reeves often suggests this. He says, schools and districts are drowning in data, but thirsty for evidence. Let's convert to evidence. The next key talks about differentiation and enrichment. I think we've got to do a better job of understanding what those mean. Differentiation at its worst form is what we sometimes do with foreign language students, slower, louder. That's not differentiation. Raising your voice and talking slower is not a teaching strategy. It doesn't work. Right? If you've ever been in a country where you don't speak the language, people yelling at you doesn't serve as a translation service. Right? Enrichment far too often has devolved to more of the same. That's not enrichment. That's poor planning. We've got kids who are off the charts brilliant. Let's stop overindulging them in what they already know and give them some stretch. The next key is about collaboration. As brilliant as any one of your audience members might be, you become infinitely more so when you connect to others. I can look back over 34 years and I can tell you this quite clearly. Anything we did was vastly superior to anything I did. We are fortunate to go to work with such smart people. Let's tap into the brilliance of everybody else. And then finally, that connection to the school-wide system, how we link all of what we are doing class by class with what we expect in our schools. So that's a quick overview of all the keys.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I was taking some notes as you were going through that. That's some great stuff. I would definitely put the link as far as how people can get to that in the show notes so they can check it out. It sounds like a great read, actually. So I guess, what would be, if you, obviously you kind of set out on a mission of some sort with this book. So I guess if you were to, I guess if a school leader took this book, read it, what would you hope when they put the book down, what would you hope they came away with?
Just that reminder that, at two ends. First of all, that it's doable, it's possible to create those kinds of learning environments that absolutely ensure learning for all. I think we've got to get beyond this being a wish to it being a guarantee, right? So the first piece there, and secondly, that there is a template for this kind of work. The vast majority, and you can reference John Hattie's visible learning work, the vast majority of things that we know that have the greatest impact on student learning are things that are in control of the adult. They don't require extra resources. They don't require further training. They require us to construct the plan as a collective team. Whether we talk about assessment practice, whether we talk about feedback, whether we talk about building positive student-teacher relationships, response intervention and instruction, all the significantly impactful practices we can engage in are under the purview of the adults. I really believe we have all the content knowledge we need. Our question has to focus on, do we have the intent, desire to be those difference makers?
Yeah, that's great stuff. Kind of like what we talked about earlier. It's there's a difference, I guess, between head knowledge and heart knowledge. I mean, I feel like that, what is it before I've heard wisdom is applied knowledge, right? Because we probably already know, and so many of us, in my own life, it's like you know what you need. It's just a matter of being intentional about doing those things that you know would help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, so I'm going to roll through some rapid fire questions if you're ready for those.
Absolutely.
So first off, what would you say is the best leadership advice you've ever received?
To take the time to hear the voices, right? So sometimes, and it doesn't mean that your idea is not a good one, but you have to recognize, as I said earlier, that you need to take time to ensure that everybody can get up to speed. And then once we make a decision, we have made that decision. So it's incumbent on the leader to hold people firm to that decision.
So what would you say is probably your biggest strength as a leader?
I think that ability to consolidate a sense of what's going on in the room right now. I believe I've got a capacity to get everybody engaged. It's what I try to do when I work with schools and groups now. I'll say it up front that by the end of my time with you, I need to hear all your voices. And then I try to ensure that that happens. So I think that ability to consolidate and respond fairly nimbly in the moment.
So is there a book or two that have made a big impact on you?
Yeah, I've got a couple that I've been going back to a little bit of late. One's called The Talent Code, and it's by Daniel Coyle. And the subtitle, Greatness Isn't Born, It's Grown, Here's How. It's got some good bits in there. And then there's another one that I just picked up recently at an ASCD event, Research-Based Strategies to Ignite Student Learning by Judy Willis. I'm not sure if there's a connection there, Jay, but Judy
related,
Willis is a doctor. I like reading sometimes folks who are not directly in our profession, their views of some of the work, right?
So what advice would you have for a teacher or a school leader in regard to working with their students?
Again, it goes back to, listen before you speak, and so I think that becomes that critical piece. Kids need to know they're being heard. I've worked in some environments where we ask kids questions and then we ignore the information because it might require us to change something. And I've worked in some schools where they do surveys. There's a great survey called Tell Them From Me. And it asks kids a bunch of questions about issues that matter most to them. If you respond to those, the kids will know that you really are listening to them. If you don't, then it was pointless to gather the information. So I think kids need to know that there's an opportunity for voice, and then there's an opportunity for choice.
Yeah. Well, so I want to jump back to the first question in the rapid fire that we were talking about. Because you'd mentioned once you make a decision, stick with it. Like, at what point do you maybe reevaluate? Like, do you kind of have benchmarks throughout the process where you say, okay, we're going to evaluate it here, here, and here? I mean, because obviously there's sometimes when you make a decision and you look back later and say, okay, that wasn't really the best decision that we made.
Yeah. No, and I think that's it. I think it is, and again, that reminds me that we talk about it's okay to fail. And I think it is okay to fail, provided you're failing smartly. And failing smartly happens when you do just what you described, Jay. You've considered everything. And yet something new emerged that derailed the best intentions. Are we willing then to go back and say, hey, you know what? We didn't get it. We didn't get it quite right. Can we now look at this new information emerging to say, well, we've got to tweak and adjust? Do we have that capacity? I think we do. I think sometimes we just start to get trapped in an initiative, particularly if we've invested time or dollars in it, even though we have early indicators that it needs to be adjusted. Again, I think kids need to know that we're willing to. My leadership rule number one is this: whether you create it or you condone it, you own it. And I think far too often we start to condone stuff, even though it annoys us, even though we want to have it change. Well, once you as a leader condone it, you own it. You give up the right to complain, right?
Man, and you probably all of us can think of lots of examples of leaders that we really, we listen to them speak after a big mess up and we're like, oh, you had such a great opportunity there, where you could have really stepped up and just owned it and said, yep, I goofed that up. Well, so kind of, jumping back to the advice thing that I was asking you before, just about students, kind of along those lines, what piece of advice would you have for a school leader as far as working with the teachers? And maybe especially those who seem a little bit more resistant to new ideas or change.
Yeah. And as I said, I think, and it just ties right back to what I've said is that choice, right? If you're going into an environment that is struggling and you're not willing to create, then what you've indicated is you're willing to condone. Well, once you condone, you give up the right to complain. When I got to supervising schools, I'd go and I'd talk with some of the principals, and they'd want to tell me about this particular individual who is so ineffective that they can't have him in their school anymore. And I'd say, well, what have you done? Well, I've gathered all this information for you. Okay, but what have you done? Well, that's it. Okay, you haven't done anything then. You have sent a very strong message. It's the same for teachers in a classroom. If you don't have your expectations delineated early on in the school year, don't be surprised that you're still struggling with classroom management 6 months into it. You've given the kids 6 months to get better at the stuff, right? We have got to be willing as leaders to go into even the most challenging of situations and spend time early on hearing the voices. Doesn't matter what's in place already as a school mission statement or as a school. Is it still owned by everybody in the building? Can we peel back the layers? Can we start to ask our colleagues, what do we stand for? What are we all about? Start giving me words before we develop a statement. And in all the iterations of the development of the statement, do we make it available for feedback? Do we hang it up in the faculty lounge with sticky notes saying, please comment on, right? Again, there's no substitute for investing that time up front to get it right. I've seen far too many examples that if you don't, you continue to wrestle with it down the road.
Yeah, and what you're going back to, or what you'd mentioned earlier, just kind of going back to that, it just reminds me of a quote: if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
You got it, right? And again, so to me, that gets back to the choice we make. The opportunity we get to exercise choice every day. And I think sometimes we want to blame circumstance rather than we chose to.
It's a lot easier to do that,
Oh, it definitely is. Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
It's always easier to name, shame, and blame.
Yeah. If he'd just done this, then,
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, good stuff. Well, so the last question I have, if you had a time machine and you could jump in it and go back to the point in time when you first made the decision to go into school leadership, what advice would you go back and give to that younger version of yourself?
Slow down. I think I was so excited. And, when I first got in there and felt that, if I didn't change everything in the first 3 months, and I think, fortunately, if there was an opportunity that was positive as a result of my youthful enthusiasm, it was that I did have some people say, hey, come on, right? Like you're asking us, we get that we're going to get there. It took us a couple of years to rebuild some of the foundational pieces at that school, right? And I know that I probably set us back before I set us forward. So slow down would be, the first thing I'd probably want to tell my younger self.
Yeah. Do you think there's a way you could communicate that in a way that you would have listened to it? Because I think back to myself when I was in my early 20s, I just, I just wasn't that coachable. And so I guess I'm curious to know, now that you're more experienced, how can you communicate that in a way that's actually received?
Well, and I think, in some strange ways, Jay, it comes down to folks like you and me with some experience now to spend some time with those young people, like John Dressler did with me at the start of my career, right? And to work with them and to give them an audience where they can share some of their ideas and then provide some feedback. I think we don't do enough early on identification of people who have potential leadership skills. And I think providing some of those forums, maybe, when I only got to avail myself of John Dressler's mentorship for 1 year because the nature of the jobs at that time were my first 3 years I spent in 3 different schools, right? So, I think maybe there's an opportunity for veterans in this role to talk to some of the newer leaders. When I get a chance to go work in schools, I'm always on the lookout for people in the audience that I think, wow, you've got some, and I'll find time during the coffee break, during the lunch break, just to go and chat with them for a little bit. So I think we can do a bit more of that.
Yeah, you're really holding us to the fire a little bit there. Because, you talked about how if people have become cynical, there's a reason. And you talked about not complaining. You're not part of the solution. You're not part of the solution. You're part of the problem. So, so I guess that says to me, if I, as an experienced person, am cynical toward those people who are younger, who maybe I feel like aren't super receptive, or maybe they're making mistakes, the question I need to be asking is, what am I doing to help?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that hits close to home.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's that hard part. For me, it came down to this. I refuse to raise my voice to complain unless I'm prepared to raise my hand to help. Problem identification is the easiest thing for us to do. We can all find fault, but are you prepared to be part of the solution? If not, then please don't bring the rest of us down constantly, because it's clear you're not interested in helping to achieve the next better solution.
Love it. Well, so finally, if one of our listeners wants to reach out to you after the show, what would be the best way to connect with you?
So Twitter is just at @Hierck. Facebook's just Tom Hierck. Gmail, just thierck@gmail.com. All of those work really well. I try to get back to people fairly quickly. I really do enjoy the conversation, the dialogue, the interactions. As we were talking at the outset, this world of technology has really afforded us a great opportunity to link up with each other, just serve as sounding boards for each other. Sometimes that's all it takes. I just need to have someone else listen to how I have processed this particular problem. So I'd welcome the opportunity to connect with any of your listeners.
And I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes so people can reach out. You must have been an early adopter with a lot of these, or just have a super unique last name.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, EduLeaders, this has been a great interview today. For the show notes of today's show and other resources, visit educatorslead.com and type the word Tom into the search tool to find his show notes. Tom, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jay, for the opportunity to be with you and your audience.
And that wraps up another episode of Educators Lead. This podcast is brought to you by Mometrics, the #1 test preparation company. Mometrics offers study materials for over 1,800 different exams, including the SAT, ACT, GED, end-of-course exams, state standard exams like the STAR, teacher certification exams, advanced placement, CLEP, ASVAB, GRE, and so many more. Mometrics takes the mountains of information students could be tested over for any given exam and boils it all down to just the fluff-free golden nuggets of information that are most likely to be on the exam. They couple that with some great study tips and test-taking strategies to help students maximize their test scores. With their interactive tutorial videos and a layout that makes lesson planning easy, Mometrics study guides, flashcards, and practice questions are a great fit for individual or classroom use. To learn more about our products and our vault of hundreds of free tutorial videos, please visit educatorslead.com/test prep. That's educatorslead.com/test prep. EduLeaders, thank you for joining us on Educators Lead. Visit us at educatorslead.com for everything we talked about today, free resources, and much, much more.